nice to meet you, Dr. Paul. And thank you again so much for your time. And I know we're all excited for you to speak, but I want to thank you for allowing me to ask you a few questions.
Well, nice to be here today.
Absolutely. So let's pretend I know nothing about you. How would you introduce yourself?
I'd probably start off by saying that I'm a physician.
Right. Okay.
You know, and practiced medicine for a lot of years, but came across some economic theories that weren't being taught in schools, and it caught my attention. I thought they were right, and the establishment was wrong. And decided to speak out, and ended up with a political career as well as a medical career.
Oh, that's excellent. That sort of leads into the next question I had, because that tells me why you chose politics. Is that the only reason that you decided to get into politics?
Yeah, I never expected to go to Congress. It was just where I could talk about issues. This was in the 1970s when the economy was in shambles. We had gotten off the gold standard, rampant inflation. There were a lot of problems. Matter of fact, my wife was a little bit concerned and asked me why I was doing this. I told her that I just wanted to speak out on the issues, and she told me she thought this could be a dangerous thing for me to do. And I said, how can it be dangerous? I'm just going to talk about this stuff. You can end up getting elected, you know.
Exactly.
But I assured her it wouldn't happen because they generally don't vote for somebody who wants to take Santa Claus away from them, you know, all the freebies.
Right.
So I really didn't think they would respond. And her comment was probably closer to, they said, well, maybe the people will be ready for hearing the truth told, you know, and get a straight answer whether they agree with you or not. They're just sick and tired of the politicians who just say anything to get reelected.
Right. Well, and the truth can be very dangerous. I think we've
Yeah.
all found that out.
Yeah.
So, being a physician, an MD, what do you believe are the top issues that Americans may not be aware of in regards to Affordable Care Act?
Well, just about the whole program, the whole principle is what is the biggest threat. The principle being that government-managed medical care is good, and Obamacare is just an additional element. It's because of the failure of the last 30 or 40 years of incrementalism with government being involved that failed that they're trying Obamacare. And right now, I mean, I can't see very many people too excited. Even the people who liked it are getting waivers so they don't have to start, and the president's backing down. Government management, just about anything, is always mismanaged. And to think that they can manage this big bureaucracy and industry called every patient needs a doctor, get involved in the doctor-patient relationship, it's a total disaster. But that principle has been around, it's around the world, and yet I'm convinced that all goods and services are best delivered in the free marketplace, including medicine, and that the problems can be solved out. And once government gets involved, cost goes up and quality goes down. And just look, we spend probably, you know, it's not because we're not well-intentioned. We spend more money in medicine than any other country, yet the quality of care is not there because it's bureaucratic. And we make another mistake. We endorse the concept of corporatism. That is, even when Obama tries reforms, he's not asking for the traditional socialized medicine. He's actually asking for sort of a corporatism where the insurance companies are involved, the drug companies are involved, the medical management companies are involved, and it becomes a bureaucracy, and the special interests are protected, the patients ignored. They have become and will become much more unhappy because I don't think there's a chance in the world that this can work.
I think there's a lot of Americans that would agree with that. I think we're hearing a lot of that now. So we're aware of where you stand on foreign involvement, but in recent instances, why were you opposed to Operation Iraqi Freedom, and what is your standpoint on military involvement in Syria?
Mainly the principle that I endorse is non-interventionism, that we ought to mind our own business, that we don't have the wisdom to go over and intervene in the internal affairs of other nations. It's picking and choosing. Even though we're told who the good guys and the bad guys are, we're deceived in, and nothing good comes up. So it's a practical political reason I don't like it. But there's a moral reason too, and that is, where do we get this authority? I mean, the authority of our government to tax individuals, draft or force or use people who volunteer to go fight wars that have nothing to do whatsoever with our national security. So I think that's wrong. But the way we go to war is wrong too. So we could argue these other issues to find out whether we should or should not. And the founders wanted us to be very cautious. So they said the executive branch can't do it. The people have to have a say through their members of Congress. They have to have an up and down vote to say whether or not you should go to war. But we don't do that anymore. We just turn this power over to the executive branch. The courts stand behind it. The people don't complain. The Congress essentially reneges on their prerogatives and allows the president to take these responsibilities. So the system failed. The founders tried to make it difficult to go to war, but since World War II, we've never had a declaration of it. And I can't recognize very many good wars, especially in the last 60 years. And this just certainly hasn't been.
That's very, what you just said means a lot to me. I'm a veteran of the Iraqi War. I served twice with the Marine Corps, and I've actually done projects on it, and I don't want to steal the limelight here, but I really appreciate and want to thank you for what you had to say on that.
Well, I think that's interesting because a lot of people would accuse me of being un-American and didn't support the troops, but in the last campaign, I think active military and retired military responded very favorably to what I'm talking about because their lives were put on the line, and then all of a sudden they get over there in the middle, and what in thunder are we doing here?
Absolutely.
So I think that we should listen to the people like you who've been there and had the experience.
Thank you again for that. Of the Democrats you've talked to over the span of the past two administrations, what are some of the changes in their overall tendencies that you have noticed?
Not a whole lot, because I haven't noticed a whole lot with the Republicans either, and I think they are much closer together philosophically than a lot of people realize. But there have been some, but they're so rare. The one Republican aggressive hawk for the Iraq War was Walter Jones, and he had a revelation and decided that our government lied to him, and he believed them, and he voted for the war, and he's been remorseful about that ever since. There are others, the Progressive Caucus in the Senate on the Democratic side. I don't see too much evolution there, but it was good to be able to work with somebody like a Dennis Kucinich, who was willing to put the issue above the party. And this is happening so often. The partisanship, in spite of the fact that they agree with this, it's partisanship for who gets to have the powers and the reins of power. That's what it seems to be. But no, I see very little evolution in Washington. I see a lot outside of Washington, which I think is a good trend.
Well, that's encouraging, because hopefully the people on the outside will get inside eventually, and that's
they have to influence Washington.
Dr. Paul, what's the most important piece of advice you've ever received, and what advice do you have for the American youth, particularly those in areas of higher education?
The most important thing, if people get interested, especially like in the freedom movement, which I am, if they get interested, I think the most important thing is to study it and understand it and define it and learn how to defend it, and then something will happen. They'll come along with something that they can start and do and implement it, or somebody will come and ask them to do it. But the most important thing is understanding it. I think it took me 20 years of intensive reading and studying economics, before I was totally convinced that I could comfortably talk about how the market works, because we've been brainwashed into thinking that, it's sort of like if you're not for the war, you're against the troops. Well, if you're not for government-managed economy, that means you don't care about people. That sort of thing. And you have to be able to defend that. But the conventional education doesn't always provide us with this information. I've often said that I had to unlearn a lot of things I learned. It took me a while to unlearn it, because I think our natural instincts are for personal liberty for almost everybody. But then we're told, well, no, you can't do that. Government do this, and then and they condition us that way. But I think that we have to be able to go and look for it, and it's getting easier all the time. That's why we should be grateful for the internet, because the information is out there. I had to work hard to find it. There were just a few think tanks that provided the literature back in the 50s and the 60s when I was interested in trying to refute some of the things I didn't think were quite right.
And speaking about the internet, it seems that there's much confusion and varying interpretations of the ideals our founding fathers embraced. What do you feel are the most common misconceptions that Americans hold in regard to our founding fathers?
Probably just the theme of the Constitution. Most people see the Constitution as being proactive and giving you particular rights or privileges or entitlements, and they'll twist it around and say, well, equal rights means I want equal free stuff. And I think what they forgot, and maybe they never learned it, but they don't endorse the idea that the Constitution was precisely written to restrain us in no way whatsoever. It was to restrain the government, protect us against abuse of government. And I find that most people I talk to today feel more threatened by our own government than they are by the Iranians invading us, I mean, this sort of thing. So, and that is changing, but I think that has been basically the flaw, has been that they don't know why the Constitution was written, and it was to restrain the government. Yet we get so conditioned to be terrorized, it's another Hitler, and they're going to be on our shores and dropping bombs on us.
Well, and that's part of the propaganda.
And fortunately, I think they're starting to lose credibility, same way with some of the economic things. Well, if you don't bail out all the rich, the world will come to an end. So the poor people get thrown in the ditch, and the rich get bailed out, and the economy deteriorates.
Yeah,
so,
expendable Americans. I mean, where did we come up with that concept?
So I think it's a healthy thing to question the authenticity of our government.
I agree completely. Why do you believe Americans interpret the Constitution in so many different ways?
I think it's education. Too many people have been taught that the flaw of the Constitution is that it's overly rigid, and you shouldn't read it that way. It should be flexible. It should be modern and adapted to our age. But the big problem there is they just say redo the interpretation. Instead of saying, well, the founders took this into consideration, and if you want to change things, just make sure you do it slowly and deliberately and get a consensus and amend the Constitution. But how many times have we heard presidents of both parties say, well, the Congress is acting too slowly, I'll write an executive order. Executive orders are laws, and at the same time, they don't have the authority to write laws. All regulations are laws, and they're written by the executive branch, endorsed by our courts. So it's so far removed from what the Constitution was supposed to be doing.
Thank you. And one last question. Again, I really want to thank you for speaking with me. A good sense of humor has helped me through a good number of my challenges that I met in life. As a man that's met and conquered many challenges yourself, what has helped you the most throughout your career, and what's your greatest motivator?
I think it's my enthusiasm for the cause of liberty, because I'm so confident that if our goals should be peace and prosperity, you can't achieve it unless you understand this, and I'm convinced of it. So it's my strong conviction that this is the proper way to go, and I reject authoritarianism. I don't believe, no matter how well-intentioned, or especially if it's well-intended, to tell you how to run your life and tell other countries what to do, in spite of their shortcomings. The shortcomings should be dealt with us as individuals. We have responsibility for our own shortcomings. We as a country have responsibility for dealing with our shortcomings. So for us to preach, to the other countries how they should run their government, with us, our country, with deep flaws in them, I think it's hypocritical and makes things a lot worse.